To come here and speak on the destiny of dissent might therefore seem superfluous, but it is necessary. But now we hear from men in the highest places of government that the time, and I quote, that the time for debate is over, that the time has come to unite, to support our leaders, to support our government. We are asked in the last analysis, which side are you on? Certainly this is a great and a generous nation, as John Glenn said. We are a strong and we are a courageous people. We have much to be thankful for, and we have much to be proud. But any who seek to comfort the people, rather than to speak plainly, to reassure rather than to instruct, to promise satisfaction rather than to reveal frustration, they deny our greatness, and they drain the strength of this country. But today, as the world seems almost to unravel around us, there is much to dissent from.
Robert Maheu was a CIA operative involved in black ops and assassinations since the 1940s. He joined the Hughes Organization in 1954 and became a chief aide, controlling Hughes' Nevada operations. From the start, he cast a dark shadow with his web of CIA connections over all of Hughes' activities. In 1975, he confessed to the Church Committee investigating CIA atrocities that in 1960 he had met with mobster Johnny Roselli on behalf of CIA Director Allen Dulles to assassinate Cuban leader Fidel Castro. Dulles was fired by JFK in 1961 for attempts to draw the U.S. into a war with Cuba. Maheu's role in the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy in 1968 can now be revealed. John Meier, the number 2 man in the Hughes Organization, has put on record that Maheu carried out the assassination.
I'm John Meier, former advisor to the recluse billionaire Howard Hughes. Among my acquaintances at that time were members of the Nixon family, Vice President Hubert Humphrey, head of the FBI J. Edgar Hoover, Paul Schrade, who was shot at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles along with Robert Kennedy, Harry Evans, who was 6 feet away from Kennedy when Kennedy was shot, and numerous others that are pertinent to this tragic event. The Hughes Organization was involved in the assassination of Robert Kennedy in 1968.
Meier witnessed some of the most important operations of the Hughes Organization in the 1960s. Seeing them become involved in Robert Kennedy's assassination was a devastating shock to him. Coming into the 1968 presidential election, President Lyndon Johnson had withdrawn from the race when Senator Robert Kennedy had entered. Kennedy, who had served as Attorney General in his brother John F. Kennedy's administration and had become a senator after President Kennedy's assassination, was the odds-on favorite to win against Republican challenger Richard Nixon. Nixon, who had lost his previous bid for the presidency in 1960 to John F. Kennedy, was a longtime Hughes crony. It was well known that Hughes had even given Nixon's brother, Don Nixon, a huge loan to start a chain of fast food restaurants, and that in return Nixon had used his powers as vice president to get Hughes Aerospace to be run through Hughes Medical Institute as a charity and therefore not subject to taxation, saving Hughes untold millions of dollars and clearing the way for massive black project space development. To this day, the IRS has kept all the records of its dealings with Hughes on this matter completely secret. John Meier had met with Robert Kennedy shortly before his death, and Kennedy had told him he knew about what had happened regarding the Hughes Medical Institute and was going to expose it. The enmity between RFK and Hughes was all Maheu needed to put his assassination plan into action. Meier kept a diary from his Hughes days that he released in a book called Age of Secrets. The book was heavily censored with almost no coverage and was essentially buried. The crucial breakthroughs in the diary reveal the hand of the Hughes Organization through Robert Maheu in the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy in Los Angeles at the Ambassador Hotel on June 5th, 1968.
My thanks to all of you, and now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there.
Senator Robert Kennedy died on June 6, 1968 at 4:44 a.m. Had he not been assassinated, most political experts agree he would have easily beaten Richard Nixon and won the presidential election. Maheu, Hughes, and the CIA couldn't afford to have a Kennedy back in the White House. The X technology they had been secretly cultivating with Hughes Aerospace couldn't be revealed. X-Protect would need to risk exposure to keep the UFO file in their hands. The outline of a complex and targeted plot to prevent Senator Robert Kennedy from becoming president is clearly laid out in John Meier's diary. He was seeing through the players of a dangerous game. An excerpt reads, October 25th, 1969. My friends and I were taken to the president's yacht all day. We also visited the president's beach house. On the yacht, I sat stunned as Don Nixon, after many drinks, started talking about the RFK assassination, his brother being in Texas when JFK was assassinated, and Bob Maheu telling Don about Bob's conversation with Don in Las Vegas. Maheu took credit for the RFK murder. The ones that sat around the table with their mouths open were shocked. There was more. Thane Eugene Cesar was a security guard that had been hired only 3 days previously by the Ambassador Hotel. He was directly behind Senator Kennedy when he was shot that night. In the confusion of SIRHAN shooting his gun some 5 feet in front of Kennedy, witnesses also saw Cesar draw and fire his gun. Cesar would change his story several times about what happened that night, claiming he never fired a shot. The police never tested his gun. Well-known LA County Coroner Thomas Naguchi did an autopsy on Senator Kennedy. It showed that he had been shot at point-blank range in the back of the head, about 1 inch from his right ear.
In other words, if I press my fingers in the back, it's about 3 inches away from the senator's ear.
Since SIRHAN was identified by witnesses as being 5 feet in front of Kennedy, Noguchi's findings indicated that SIRHAN was not the assassin of Robert Kennedy. Whoever it was had to be directly behind him. The person behind Kennedy was Thane Eugene Cesar. Meier's diary excerpt. June 13th, 1968. Listening to the radio where they were discussing the RFK assassination and who was shot, etc. They mentioned Thane Cesar, who was a security guard at the hotel working for ACE Guard Security and was also employed by Lockheed Aircraft. I remember Thane from his trips to Vegas, where he was meeting with numerous gaming people and was introduced to me by Jack Hooper, an associate of Bob Maheu. June 14th, 1968. Bob Maheu called and told me to come over to his house at 8:30 p.m. that evening, and I did. He was furious and wanted to know why I was checking up on Thane. I was stunned at his anger, and he said to me that if I kept discussing this matter, he would see that I was no longer around the Hughes operation. He then told me that he was responsible for all security matters in Nevada, and he would personally handle the Paul Schrade convalescence at the ranch. June 15th, 1968, 8 a.m., received a call from Jack Hooper, who told me that he was speaking with Bob Maheu, and I was never to mention his name or Bel Air Patrol. He told me Maheu wanted to speak to me after we spoke, and I called Maheu 15 minutes later. Bob wanted to impress upon me that he was in charge of the Nevada operations, and everything I did in Nevada involving Hughes, he was to be informed about. It's clear from these excerpts from Hughes's aide, John Meier, that from the outset Bob Maheu was worried that Meier had figured out his role in the assassination of Robert Kennedy. His inquiries about Thane Eugene Cesar led Maheu to issue the not-so-subtle threats and final ultimatum for Meier to cease looking into this before it was too late. Maheu and the CIA forces behind him saw Meier as a dangerous wild card as they moved to consolidate the Hughes Organization and conceal their crime. The actions of X-Protect to preserve the wall of secrecy around covert aerospace programs would change society forever. Since the John Frankenheimer film The Manchurian Candidate came out in the early 1960s, the clandestine idea of a mind-controlled assassin had been in the public mind, although it wouldn't be clear for another decade that the program was in fact entirely real, and something the CIA on record had destroyed all of its files on concerning its existence. With his deep CIA history and Black Ops background, Maheu had access to the best CIA mind control programmers. The jaw-dropping detail that Maheu operative Johnny Roselli was co-owner of the Santa Anita racetrack that employed SIRHAN suggests that Maheu had Roselli find the patsy to be programmed for the RFK assassination. SIRHAN, being introverted and highly suggestible, made an ideal candidate. SIRHAN would disappear for months, with no contact to family and friends, just before his strange appearance at the Ambassador Hotel. Years later, CIA MKULTRA Hypno-programmer William Bryan would brag to friends that he had programmed SIRHAN to be at the Ambassador and shoot that night. SIRHAN's own notebooks, found after the assassination, mention the name of Albert DeSalvo, the infamous Boston Strangler, who had been coerced into a confession under hypnosis by the very same William Bryan.
You have to have the person locked up physically to have control over them. You have to use a certain amount of physical torture involved, and there is also the use of long-term hypnotic suggestion, probably drugs, whatever, and so on. Under these situations where you have all this going for you, like the prison camp and so on, yes, you can brainwash a person to do just about anything. What I'm speaking about are the innumerable instances that we ran into when I was running the country's brainwashing and anti-brainwashing programs.
SIRHAN claimed to have no memory after the incident and thought he was at a shooting range, with Maheu's strongman Thane Eugene Cesar pulling off the murder and SIRHAN to take the fall for the crime. The stage was set for Nixon to become president, and for Hughes to have the most powerful man in the world support his efforts to make Hughes Aerospace the future of space travel and defense. In a chilling final excerpt from Meier's diary, he tells of Maheu meeting Nixon's brother Don the morning that it was announced that Senator Robert Kennedy had died. June 6, 1968, 5 a.m., Bob Maheu called to ask about the Don Nixon meeting and suggested 8:30 for breakfast at the Desert Inn Country Club. I went to the club. Maheu was all smiles, and Don Nixon walks in all smiles. What followed next had to be seen to be believed. They embraced each other and Don Nixon said, "Well, that prick is dead." And Maheu said, "Well, it looks like your brother is in now." At the time, I did not even know what they were talking about. Maheu joked that they should now be calling Don Nixon Mr. Vice President. In a final twist, Cesar, who would eventually flee to the Philippines, was found to have not only worked at Lockheed Aircraft, but in their elite Skunkworks division, well known in UFO research circles as the hub of exotic technology redevelopment. Ben Rich, the director of Skunkworks, known as the father of stealth, once said, "We now have the technology to take ET home." According to those who had attended his final lecture, he also said, "We had figured out how to do interstellar travel." He alluded to these technologies being wrapped up in black projects that would never be revealed. In a letter from July 1986, Rich explained that he believed in both man-made and extraterrestrial UFOs, explaining that many UFOs were just unfunded opportunities. As the head of Skunkworks, Rich was in a unique position to know. They were the very heart of UFO and X-technology development. How this 26-year-old security guard merited such a posh assignment at one of the world's most top-secret advanced development programs reflects the deep tentacles of CIA aerospace connections and their darkest secret, the lethal unit that protects the X technology inside the UFO file, X-Protect.
My last question for you actually concerns something you wrote in your book in relation to your dad and your uncle, which is you've very bravely gone on the record saying that the official versions and those stories don't hold up. You wanted to set the record straight that there was someone there that night named Thane Eugene Cesar, and that you thought it was important that the investigation kind of led you there eventually.
You've pointed out that Thane Eugene Cesar was right behind your dad and part of hotel security, an employee of a major military contractor. and he eventually moved to Indonesia, and certainly had a definite intelligence footprint. Now, the official version has SIRHAN as the assassin. Many researchers have looked into this and don't believe he could have done it, especially not alone. Now, a few years ago, you caused quite a stir speaking on Charlie Rose by saying that your father, Senator Robert Kennedy, didn't believe the Warren Commission conclusion that Lee Harvey Oswald was a lone assassin with a magic bullet, and that he believed that the CIA was involved in President Kennedy's assassination. Many feel that your father was headed to the presidency in 1968. How did the official version of his death unravel for you?
But I think it's clear now that SIRHAN, although he fired at my father, could not have killed my father. And that was clear from the autopsy report. My father was killed from behind by 4 shots that were contact shots that were actually with and this is what Thomas Naguchi found. Thomas Naguchi did not believe my father was killed by SIRHAN. SIRHAN fired only 2 shots toward my father, and we know what happened to those bullets. One went into Paul Schrade, who was the UAW organizer who was standing near him, and the other went into a door jamb behind him. And then the other 6 shots, when they grabbed SIRHAN and they redirected his gun, he fired 6 more shots. We know what happened to each one of those. They all went into it. 2 of them went into one person, and the others all hit people. And there were 13 shots fired that night. And SIRHAN only had 8 chambers in his revolver, and he had no chance to reload. And the 4 shots that killed my father, SIRHAN was always 5 to 8 feet in front of my father, never behind him. And all 4 shots that hit my father came from behind, and all of them, the barrel of the gun, according to the autopsy, was touching my father's skin. The person who likely pulled those triggers is a guy who died about 2 months ago called Thane Eugene Cesar. He died in the Philippines. He was a security guard that night. He had only gotten the security job about a week before. And, when my father's schedule was already known. And his real job was that he worked at the Lockheed plant, and he was a CIA asset. And those things, the evidence for that is very, very strong, and a lot of the evidence was hidden by the LA police. There was a lot of monkey business that went on that's very well documented now. These are things that should be investigated. SIRHAN is still in jail. My father wouldn't want that. And my father was the top law enforcement officer in the United States. He believed in justice. And he would not want an innocent man in jail for his murder.
X-Protect has thrived in secrecy and have utilized the X technology in the UFO file at the public's expense for decades. The world at large has not had access to the UFO information that's been withheld by a vast power structure sitting in the strange partnership between the CIA on one side and the aerospace defense contractors on the other. It is in fact a covert government that has usurped the public overt government and put in place the perfect storm of a global control grid that's being built with no oversight, but lots of unlimited dollars thanks to the missing trillions at the Pentagon, HUD, and NASA. X-Protect has been there every step of the way, and now we hear from the same partnership between the CIA and the aerospace defense companies that UFOs are a threat and must be added to an already bloated defense budget. And the New York Times runs stories with CIA officials claiming they will give the public UFO disclosure. That soft disclosure means that X-Protect is in a position to roll out the X technology, which means the world is a more dangerous place than ever before. As we remember those who have fallen while fighting X-Protect, we must remember we can move our culture forward by destroying the wall of secrecy erected by these covert organizations. The only way we can do it is to expose X-Protect and the lethal means that they've used to control every aspect of society. In the final analysis, if we are to understand the power structure on planet Earth, we must understand X-Protect and hold them accountable for their actions. The whole world is watching and waiting. I'm Dark Journalist. Thank you for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you soon.